Balance of power theory, Thucydides' trap and Soekarno's forgotten contribution. Balance of power theory is a concept in international relations that explains how countries try to prevent the domination of other countries or alliances, by forming counter-alliances or by increasing its own military capabilities. The goal is to maintain stability and prevent conflict so that no single country has enough power to threaten or dominate the others. However, on the other hand, a thinker from Harvard University, America, who was also Assistant Secretary of Defense during the administration of President Bill Clinton, Professor Graham Allison identified a scenario he called the Thucydides trap. This is a theory concocted from the work of the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, who wrote about the history of the Peloponnesian War. The 5th century BC Greek historian and politician wrote about the famous story of the Peloponnesian War. In the nearly 30-year conflict that rocked the Greek city-states, Thucydides observed Sparta as a hegemon or dominant power in the Aegean Sea. However, Athens grew so fast that Sparta became afraid. They feared that Athens would pose a real threat to their power, so they struck first. And that was the trap. Athens's ambition and Sparta's fear of its threatened hegemony had drawn both into conflict when neither expected it. When Sparta attacked Athens, it forced the other Greek city-states to choose a side, and the Great Greek Wars ensued for decades. Thucydides later wrote that the entire Peloponnesian War was caused by the rapid growth of Athens' power and the anxiety it caused in Sparta. In his 2017 book entitled Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap?, Graham Allison explains how competition between existing dominant powers and rising powers can trigger conflict. He explains that when a rising power challenges the dominance of a previously established power, the dominant power tends to respond with violence. Graham Allison argues that the Thucydides trap was one of the greatest errors of judgment in history. Many countries fail to understand that increasing the power of a country can trigger fear and reactions from dominant countries that often lead to war. This refers to countries that are developing rapidly and becoming much more powerful and influential on the global stage, such as China today. Powerful and dominant countries such as the United States and Western Europe began to see these developing countries as a threat to their power and hegemony. The dominant states' fear of threats from these rapidly growing states often causes them to respond with military action or war to maintain their power and hegemony. Presenting this theory in 2015, Graham Allison revealed that a team of researchers at the Harvard-affiliated Belfer Center identified 16 cases over the past 500 years that mirrored the Spartan-Athenian situation of new emerging powers threatening the pre-existing dominant power. Of these 16 cases, 12 resulted in war. On the other hand, there is one point in the coordinates of world history that is often overlooked by Western historians, which is about how the world is indebted to the figure of Soekarno, who succeeded in freeing the world from the snare of Thucydides' trap in the Cold War era. Soekarno, the first president of Indonesia, with its active free diplomacy during the Cold War, elegantly played a vital role in applying these theories in its foreign policy, giving the world a third choice of two options that would clearly lead to the Thucydides trap that would destroy the world. Together with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, and Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito, Bung Karno created a balance, a new force that shifted the direction of the trajectory of the end of the competition between the two blocs that was created at that time, so that a new balance of power was created, which is now known as the non-aligned movement, which keeps the world away from the Thucydides trap, which will lead the world to destruction, namely World War III and nuclear war. Soekarno showed that he understood the essential essence of the balance of power in international politics. In the context of the Cold War, Bung Karno navigated the conflicting relations between the Western Bloc led by the United States and the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, not only for the national interests of Indonesia alone, but also to advance world peace, as mandated in the Indonesian Fundamental Constitution, the UUD 1945. The non-aligned movement was one of Bung Karno's greatest contributions to international politics. This movement, which created a neutral third bloc during the Cold War, could be considered an escape route for countries unwilling to be trapped in the dualism of East-West competition, thus creating a new balance of power not tied to the dominance of the US or the Soviet Union. Concept intersection. The balance of power theory and Thucydides' trap provides an excellent framework for understanding the direction of Soekarno's foreign policy and politics. By creating a third axis of power that was non-aligned and free and active, Bung Karno brilliantly succeeded in implementing a balance of power strategy in a beautiful and elegant way to stop the competition for dominance and clash between the two great powers at that time, namely the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. This strategic step is not only aimed at protecting Indonesia's national interests, but also for a much greater interest, namely the realization of world peace as the ideals of the Indonesian nation, as stated in the Indonesian Fundamental Constitution, the UUD 1945. Current relevance. The lessons of Soekarno's foreign policy and the concept of balance of power remain relevant today. In a constantly changing world with complex global power dynamics, understanding how to maintain the balance of power is key to international stability and peace. Final notes. Soekarno is a real example of a leader who understands and applies the theory of balance of power in his foreign policy. By studying his history and strategies, we can learn valuable lessons about how to face the challenges in contemporary international politics today. Contribution to the balance of power theory. The above explanation shows that the balance of power theory is not something static. It is dynamic, growing, developing, and adapting to changes in the security environment, which is now increasingly connected along with the pace of development of the times and the relationships between people who inhabit that security environment. So it can be concluded that the balance of power theory is a dynamic process of changing the balance of power, or the dynamics of the balance of power that arises from the process of adapting the fundamental instincts of countries to survive, defend themselves, their existence and interests in international anarchy, which is bound by the law of survival of the fittest, in order to avoid existential threats such as the loss of a nation or state, as experienced by the Ottoman Empire and the Soviet Union, which no longer exist. From here, at least we know that the world owes a great debt to the figure of Bung Karno, who has kept the world away from the Thucydides trap and saved the world from destruction due to the competition for hegemony over world domination. Jala Samudra Institute, Asymmetric Warfare Department, Heroes Overview. Now you know who saved the world.